What comes to mind when you think about turning points in the Second World War? Perhaps it's the tactical brilliance of the commanders, or the brutal combat fought by troops across land, sea and sky. But on the 4th of June 1944, the most influential person in the Allied forces wasn't in the cockpit or on the battlefield. He was holding a weather chart. This was meteorologist James Stagg. The new film Pressure, starring Brendan Fraser, Andrew Scott and Damian Lewis, tells the story of a vital decision in June 1944, whether the Allied forces should call off the largest seaborne invasion in history, the D-Day landings, just a day before they were set to begin.
Get me the latest readings from every single base within 2,000 miles of Normandy. The invasion's confirmed for Monday.
In the film, General Dwight D Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, is shown weighing up the decision to postpone the landings based on a weather forecast by James Stagg.
The final decision on the timing of D-Day will be mine, and mine alone.
It was a forecast that Stagg himself wasn't 100% sure of, yet its significance was unprecedented and had the power to change the outcome of the Second World War. So how much of this film is based on real history? Well, I got the chance to visit the archives of the Met Office, that's the shorter name for the UK's National Meteorological Service, to examine Stagg's real diary and the original weather charts to find out what really happened in the run-up to the D-Day landings.
Tiger was a training op, dress rehearsal for D-Day. They walked right into it. One mistake. Just that one mistake.
Haig, you have to stop doing this to yourself. What's done is done.
To understand why the stakes were so high for Stagg and Eisenhower, we have to look at what happened 2 months before. Between the 22nd and the 30th of April 1944, 30,000 Allied troops had conducted a massive rehearsal at Slapton Sands in Devon. Slapton Sands was selected because it was similar to parts of the French Normandy coast, making the rehearsal as realistic as possible. Eisenhower even decided to use live naval and artillery ammunition in the rehearsal to harden the troops to the reality of combat. In the early hours of the 28th of April 1944, 8 landing ships of US troops made their way from Lyme Bay off the Devon coast to Slapton Sands for the D-Day rehearsal. The exercise, dubbed Exercise Tiger, was huge in scale. The whole of Force U, comprising over 30,000 men bound for Utah Beach, were taking part. But the whole plan turned into a tragedy when German enemy boats, known as E-boats, managed to intercept the convoy. This, combined with error in radio frequencies, which disrupted communication, and the troops' lack of life vest training, meant that a shocking total of 946 servicemen died as a result of Exercise Tiger. The disaster was so sensitive that the military ordered a total blackout on information about the exercise. The survivors were threatened with court-martial if they even spoke about it. Under no circumstances could something like this happen again. So for the real Normandy invasions in June, they had to get it right. And that's where James Stagg comes in. Stagg, played by Andrew Scott in the film, was a Scottish meteorologist who worked for the Met Office. Group Captain Stagg had gained a reputation by World War II as an experienced and proficient forecaster, and in 1944 he had been appointed as Chief Meteorological Officer and advisor to General Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander of the D-Day operation. But weather forecasting at this point wasn't an exact science. In a time with no satellite imagery, there was lots of educated guessing involved. And Stagg wasn't working in a vacuum either. He was coordinating 3 different teams: the British Met Office, the Royal Navy, and the US Strategic and Tactical Air Forces. And there was lots of disagreement. Originally, Eisenhower had planned D-Day for the 5th of June 1944, and the Americans were optimistic. But when Stagg looked at the weather data, he saw something terrifying.
We are faced with a succession of 2 aggressive storms.
Are you absolutely certain?
D-Day will be calm and sunny.
I couldn't disagree with that more.
Let's look at the actual weather chart from early June 1944.
So the Allies were supposed to invade Normandy on the 5th of June. Everything was ready. The only thing that depended on was whether the weather would be good enough. So the decision would have to be made early in the hours on the 4th of June in order to move all of the troops across the Channel to Normandy to invade at dawn on the 5th. And so this is the weather chart that the meteorologists would have been looking at to make that decision. Can we invade when we are supposed to invade? And unfortunately, they could see 2 low pressures sitting out in the Atlantic here, in these fronts, and they knew that that meant that the weather would not be good enough to invade on the 5th of June.
So, on the 4th of June, Stagg could see 2 aggressive storms heading for the English Channel. If the Allies invaded on the 5th, as Eisenhower had planned, the landing craft would be tossed about by the choppy conditions while they were crossing the Channel. Cloud cover would also make aerial bombardment impossible. Hope was on the horizon though, as Stagg could see that a high pressure front was coming, although it was a few days away. It wouldn't come in time for the 5th of June. But when Stagg brought his findings to Eisenhower, the general didn't want to change the date.
If you invade tomorrow, they're going to be washed away.
300,000 men with families that they may never see again. Why should I trust you?
We must face the facts! The facts, however frightening they may be!
A crucial part of the film is the immense stress that Stagg was under as the invasion decision loomed, and this is portrayed in Pressure by Andrew Scott. But Stagg's own diary shows us just how close the decision was. I was lucky enough to see it in person in the Met Office archive.
He had a group of people who were advising him. They didn't always agree. In fact, they very rarely agreed. And this is his diary, in which he writes down sort of the changes in the weather, what's going on, who's not agreeing with other people, why he's getting so stressed about it because he can't get anyone to actually agree on a forecast. And we get things like, I am now getting rather stunned, it is all a nightmare.
Stagg knew that if the delay went ahead and the weather turned out to be fine, the secret invasion risked being discovered. But if he advised that the invasion went ahead and the storm he predicted did hit, he'd have the blood of countless men on his hands. At 4:15 in the morning, on the 5th of June, Eisenhower finally agreed to move the D-Day invasion to the 6th. Stagg wrote that he had made the final and irrevocable decision. Whatever the outcome, the decision was taken. Legible to us today, in black and white, his own words show us just how much pressure was on his shoulders. But there's an underlying question here. Why didn't the Germans see D-Day coming? Well, the Allies had a secret weapon. Because the weather moves from west to east, the Allies had data collecting stations in the Atlantic that the Germans couldn't reach. More importantly, thanks to the code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park, they were also able to read the Germans' own weather observations. The German chief meteorologist, Richard Habermehl, told his commanders that an invasion was impossible in early June. He was so sure that many German officers actually left their posts for war games in Rennes, which were tactical exercises designed to simulate an Allied invasion. But little did the Germans know a real Allied invasion was about to happen. Stagg hadn't just found a weather window, he'd found a window of total surprise. You can find out even more about the invasion that happened next from expert historian Taylor Downing in another History Extra video, including why Adolf Hitler believed that at first D-Day was a trick. When the 6th of June arrived, the high-pressure front had moved closer to the English Channel, and although it wasn't in the perfect place, it was enough for the D-Day landings to be successfully carried out. The Allied forces secured a foothold in Normandy, and from there they began their advance through occupied France. And the operation ultimately switched the balance of power in Europe. And it was James Stagg's decision that was crucial to the outcome of the D-Day landings and the Allied success in World War II. So when you're watching the film Pressure, you can be in no doubt that the stress, uncertainty, and tension depicted on the screen was real. It was lived and felt by real historical figures, and we can still see sources that confirm it today. Want to know more about D-Day? For more World War II content, including a 3-part podcast series breaking down the events of the invasion in step-by-step detail, download the HistoryExtra app.